Hello, everybody, and you're very welcome to Irish Wheelchair Association's International Day of Persons with a Disability celebrating Noelle Daly. Every day this week, we're talking to to and celebrating someone who has a disability, but more importantly, someone who was achieving incredible things in life. And today, I'm delighted to welcome you, Noelle. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for
Um,
inviting me.
and by way of background, Noelle is from Dublin. Noelle is married to Shane, and she has three boys: Daniel, Jack, and Ivan.
Mm.
But more importantly, or just as importantly, not more importantly, Noelle is, and I have to read this. Noelle, bear with me because there's so much to it. Noelle is the co-founder of Mobility Mojo and is an advanced accessibility consultant for accessible built environments. Noelle is a member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. She's the chairperson and the convener of an expert committee for international standards on accessible tourism and related services, and an expert representative on ISO TC 19.
Yeah,
Now, that sounds rather science fictiony to me, Noel, but
yeah.
I'm sure it's all very real. And it's when you read it out, it piques the interest. So tell me more about you. You've got your personal life. We'll explore that. We've got your mobility mojo, but let's start with mojo.
Mm.
How did that start for you,
It
and what piqued you?
started way back when. So I was involved in spinal injuries. I was working there for a long time, and I kept seeing the same question arising again and again. And it stemmed from, say somebody would have a trauma, catastrophic injury, could be a stroke or spinal cord injury or amputee. And after about a year, you would have the family and the person coming back, and they're ready to go on their first holiday. And so my very strong interest and passion became accessible tourism. And
Okay.
so what I would do is I would I kept over the years compiling all of this information about accessible holidays. And honestly, it was just sheer joy when somebody would come back and something had worked out, from the flights to the transport to the venue, and everything worked out great. And I'd always ask, can you know, give a review, and would somebody else feel that was good and going to work for them? So it was always such a fear around, can we travel? And it was so important because once that worked, the person then said, right, what else can I do?
Mm.
And so they would either need to maybe upskill or whatever, but it would just generally kickstart their life again. And that's why it was so important. And I guess I was working at that, really intensely for about 7 years, where, I was compiling all the information around accessible holidays. And I kept thinking, why isn't somebody doing this? Like, why is it so hard to find a destination that was accessible? Um, and eventually I thought, somebody isn't doing this. I'll have to try and do something. Um, And I put together what I thought was a business plan. And I went down to my local enterprise office and presented it. And they liked it. They saw there was something there. So I got on a business course. And it was as I was going through that you kind of hone your skills, and hone your idea, and really tune in. You're doing your research. Who else is out there? Who's going to be competition? So that was where I started. And to go on about where Mobility Mojo started, I was pitching in a social entrepreneurs competition, and I met Stephen Klusky, who was also pitching because he had his own business and he was in transport. And the two of us were pitching against each other. And that first year, neither of us got through. But we started to talk and we said, look, we're in the same space here. And what do you think? And so we joined forces. And the next year we went in and we pitched together and we got through. And so that was the kind of the starting of it all.
Mm.
And so we were joining that way. And that's where it started. It was interesting. There was different stages along the way. There was one very interesting. In the very beginning, we had our own website, and we were expecting people to come to our website where we had all the information. And it was when we were pitching in at the Web Summit in
Hmm.
Lisbon, and we got talking to Airbnb, and they were asking us that they needed help with the whole area about, trying to show people how accessible their venues were. And so it got us thinking. And we were saying, well, look, in order to help them, we have to be able to adapt our product to suit their platform. And so that's where we pivoted. We said,
Okay.
okay, well, rather than people coming to ours. And what was great, that was the beginning of where we are now and how it all started, because now we were working with other platforms and helping them show. So what that did was it meant that when we started working with hotels, we would give them the tool to the manager on the ground would walk through and assess their hotel and then plug it in all that information onto their hotel website. So it meant that people, when they're looking for this information, they don't necessarily have to go and try and find something like Mobility Mojo. They could go to the mainstream where everybody else was going and
Hmm.
booking their holidays and their venue in the same way that everybody else does. And so it just made more sense. It was more inclusive rather than, you know, trying to get somebody to still be segregated.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
where
And
it,
it
I know
makes
I went on a long way, but
No, no, no. It
that's
makes
where
so
it
much more
started.
sense. It does,
Yeah,
and look, we'll talk about this in a little while in the sense that the business has progressed
yeah,
and pivoted and moved, as you just referred to there. But I'm going back to a comment you made earlier on about the joy that you had. That was really what floated your boat. It was the joy of seeing someone.
yeah,
So I suppose from your own experience, did was it that joy based on having experienced that frustration about
yeah.
having been that person?
I know. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. As a wheelchair user, like you just there's so many obstacles. Like there is when you're going, you're just never sure. There's always
mm,
the fear. Will I get into the place? Will I get into and there are so many obstacles that you meet. Some of them are just hilarious. They're
yeah.
not funny really, but they are
No, but
in
you
one way. You
unless you have the
kind of
sense of
go,
humor, you're not going to
yeah,
enjoy your holiday. Yeah.
yeah. And so what we thought was there is a fear around this for the industry, and where they were afraid because they were afraid, oh gosh, we're going to get into trouble and somebody will kill us, and whereas we were
Yeah.
saying, well, let's
Yeah.
empower them, let's
Yes.
give them the
Yeah.
knowledge and make them proud and make them say, okay, look, we're open, we're accessible, we know how to do it.
Yeah,
So
and well,
that,
therein
yeah,
is the solution in the sense
yeah,
that talk to the people who know, and we don't make the decision
yeah,
about disabled people or people with disability, whatever your term is. Um, don't make it for them.
yes, exactly,
Talk to them
empower
and
them, yeah,
empower them to make
yeah,
come to that solution for you.
yeah,
But you lived in the States
yes,
for a while with your family, and
yeah.
then and then you moved back to Ireland. So how did living in the States, number one, I suppose, enhance or increase your experience and your perspective? What did you learn over there?
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. We lived in Oregon, and it was my first real encounter of how good the ADA was. This is the American Disability Act,
Yes.
and that came into force over there after, I suppose, like wars, Vietnam War and stuff, and
Yeah.
veterans coming home, and so the joy of not having to ring a restaurant in advance. You just knew you could get in. They were all, it was
Mm.
everything was, you could go swimming, they'd hoists, they'd two hoists, you could go anywhere and you just didn't have to think. So that was a big eye opener. Get the
Okay.
bus. It was just such a pleasure. But I joined a group over there. I was only there a year and a half, but I joined a group. And what was interesting about this group was it had experts on it. It had, architects and engineers, and there was people with different accessibility needs, like somebody with sight and hearing and mobility, and they would all look at plans. Whatever building was going to be constructed in the pre-planning phase, they would
Mm.
look at the plan. So I was part of this group, and you would comment on door widths and ramp gradients and different things like that. So it meant that before a building was built, if it was approved along the way, by different groups, then they built it once and they got it right. They didn't have to retrofit, and they didn't have to, you know, do things that
Mm.
got it wrong, and cost more money. So
Yes, yeah.
I thought that was very interesting, and I thought, well, that's the right way to do it.
Mm.
So
So was
that
there
was
a bit of a
interesting.
culture shock then moving back to Ireland? And I'm interested. I asked this question
Yeah,
probably with a loaded answer in my mind or a preconceived answer in my mind, because some of the problems are some of the issues that you've just mentioned still exist today
they
in
do.
many realms. But back then, when you moved back to Ireland, that maybe whenever it was 10 or 15 years ago, whatever it um, was it a bit of a shock to come back to Ireland and then see where we were?
Um, I didn't think Ireland was too bad because I'm
Okay,
a long
okay,
time using a wheelchair, and right from the very beginning, it was dreadful. Like there was maybe two places you could go with certainty, and that was it. Whereas
okay.
there was more and more. But I suppose the difference was in America you could be sued, so that's why they got their act together pretty
Money
quickly.
talks. Money talks.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and so, but I definitely think, and that's why I suppose I got involved in standards, because that really does give the good guidelines, and particularly around universal design. I know
Okay.
the NDA are fabulous with that, so it's just, and they're recognized the world over.
Mm.
So yeah, I think Ireland are certainly improving. Yeah, it's a bit of a culture shock, all right, when you came home, but definitely, your bus is by and large
Okay. So
different. Yeah,
it is. And look, we're still facing the same issues today, but the principles still apply. Like if we were looking at housing, we're still looking at the fact that
yeah,
houses are not livable and they're only
yeah,
visitable,
yeah,
and that there is a crisis, and the solution to that is, as you say, about planning, not to be retrospectively
yes,
fixing,
yeah,
about planning and putting in place the standards, the UD plus plus, which
yeah.
will design standards which will make houses livable. So
And
we're
having a
still,
certain quota before
yes, yeah,
before a block of apartments goes up, there has to be a certain quota that will be, and it makes sense because people are living longer, and
hmm
because as people get older, you'll generally get hearing and eyesight and mobility will come into it. So rather than people having to move because their venue isn't accessible anymore for their needs,
yeah.
that they can stay there in their community with people they know all their
Mm.
lives. So yes, obviously on many different levels it makes sense.
And so we've still got a work to do. So I presume that that's a primary factor for you. But you came home when you were raising your family, so you've made the choice to do that. So
Yeah,
did this work stop when or start when your family were that little bit older, or
yeah.
or how did you manage it? Because you gave me the best piece of parenting advice when I had my 6-year-old, which was you told me to take his shoes off because he wouldn't run outside onto the stones in his bare feet. And I thought it was brilliant. Simple
Yeah,
solutions
it
are
worked.
simple. It
Yeah,
worked. It worked
yeah,
until he developed an unbelievable skill of running across stones without shoes on.
yeah,
So now it's come back to bite us. But it was brilliant at the time.
yeah.
So was your family then? Had you done that work, and was this the next phase, or were you able to balance the two together? How did that work?
No, they were very young. Like my youngest, Ivan, couldn't walk when we went over. Well, insofar as he was a baby, uh, and so they were all very young. What went in my favor was that they kind of had them one, two, three. So
Okay.
in the very beginning, I didn't have to get up and pile them all into the car to bring the eldest to school or anything. They weren't
Yes.
at
Okay.
school at that stage, so having them all together was a plus. Um, and then when they were in school, when they were in primary school, then I started and I was upskilling. Then I was kind of getting more into computers, and I did a teaching course and stuff. So I just wanted to get really on top of what technology was out there and what I
Okay.
could do. So that's where it all started. And then I went into part-time work. That's why I was working with spinal injuries,
With spinal injuries. Okay.
and then I came out, and so by the time I started my own business, they were all in late secondary school,
Okay. Okay. So
able to get their own dinner when they came home.
And is that probably why they love cooking now? They got that from
Yes, they
you
love,
because
yeah,
you're a cook. You love your been in the kitchen with your
yeah,
Spotify list and
yeah.
the fire lighting. I think we could
I
live in the
know,
same
and in
house
between a
together.
glass of
Noel,
wine.
I think most important, most important.
Yeah,
Okay, so that independence, they were more self-sufficient, but it was still a balancing act
yeah.
for you. So how did you balance all of that together?
But there was always the dropping. Look, we live in a rural area, so there was always the collections, the dropping and collecting,
Mm,
always. Um, so yeah, it is a balancing act.
mm.
I put my family first, always. Um, but you generally, certainly when you start your own business, which I really encourage anybody to, if they have an idea to start, but just be aware you're going to be working all the hours. So nighttime was my time to
Okay,
work a
it
lot.
was and was it terrifying?
Yes. Yes. Somebody described it as you go to the edge of the cliff, you hold your nose, and you jump in to the water, and you either sink or
Okay,
swim. And I think that's a really good um, analogy because that's what happens. But you swim. Generally, you
okay.
swim. You know,
And
and if
was
you
it that?
don't, it's not the
Yeah.
right business. But there'll be some. It'll work out.
And that's an interesting point. It's not that. So obviously, this was I presume the joy you described about seeing
Yeah.
somebody else possibly. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe not experiencing the same challenges that you did earlier on. That maybe the realistic chance of a holiday for them, to opening up the realm of
Yeah.
possibility, to that light at the end of the tunnel. I suppose that was your passion. That's what drove you,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was so personal.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
That's what it
and then
was. Yeah.
yeah, and in the times then when you said you went for applications, was it with Enterprise Ireland? Was
Yeah.
it that you
So
said,
we
and then
had,
you met Stephen and
yeah, it was
all of that?
social entrepreneurs
Okay,
and
sorry, social
then
entrepreneur.
and then Enterprise Ireland. So we kind of went both. Um, and it was really after that. Now I know I was talking about um, tourism in the beginning, but
Mm,
but when COVID hit, it changed everything. So all of the doors closed there, um, and that meant we had to rethink. And really, in our experience, it was the best thing that happened in one way because we had also got requests for, well, will this work for offices?
mm.
And so that's where we developed this new tool for assessing an office for accessibility, and really from there it's taken off big time. So that's our main focus now. It's corporate, and because it's digital, it's worldwide. It can go anywhere.
Okay, okay. And did you apply the mom test at that point?
Yeah.
Tell us about the mom test so
The
people know
mom
what this
test.
is.
This is a book that um, I suppose we had made every mistake in the beginning, and we were at some lecture and somebody mentioned this book, and it's one book that I would highly recommend anybody with
Mm,
an idea of a business, starting a business. Get the mom test. There's only 8 chapters, and what it does is it sort of, rather than ask your mom because she's going to lie to you, yeah, you say, is this a good idea? Is this a good? Um, that it throws you out there and you say, look, you have to meet people,
mm.
clients, and ask them, and it gives you questions to ask, and stuff. So it's really throwing you in there, but it's brilliant. Highly recommended. Best book.
I love it. I love the concept of ask your mom because it is
Mm,
true. My
mm,
mom will try to protect me and be nice
yeah,
to me, so she's not the most
yeah.
independent arbiter of any of my initiatives or ideas. Um, so you moved into the business world,
Mm.
um, but with a focus on business rather than tourism.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
and I suppose in engaging with them, and do you think now that inclusion and disability is here to stay? And I'll ask you this in the context. Years ago, I remember being involved, if you remember them, with the Ability Awards here
yeah.
in Ireland, and it was a clever concept of putting business in competition with each other to drive the inclusive and the disability and inclusion agenda. But when the crisis hit,
Mm,
um, the what was considered a must-have soon became a could-have and a nice to have, and it was
mm,
deprioritized because it
yeah,
wasn't seen as an issue. So it fell by the wayside.
yeah.
So now diversity and inclusion is more of a hot topic nowadays. But
Mm.
my question is, do you think it's here to stay?
I do. I do.
Why? Why?
Because we're dealing with businesses, and when you're on talks, you're meeting them and you're talking to big corporates, the enthusiasm, like the way they're embracing this, and it's what people are looking for in businesses. It's absolutely, it's, I don't know what the word I can use, but it's wonderful. It really is wonderful.
Mm,
Um, too often, as a person with a disability, you're kind of nearly going cap in hand, and you're begging and you're
mm,
asking and stuff. But this is different. I'm seeing a real difference. You're getting companies who wholeheartedly embrace this and want to, and are asking all the time, how can they improve? Bringing neurodiversity into the questions, bringing, as much as they
mm,
can. They're striving to do better. And I think a lot of it is being driven by millennials and our
mm.
lovely Gen Zs, who
Yes.
care very much about this. There's a deep sense of purpose and justice built into them. They don't see color, they don't see disability, they just
Hmm.
see people, and they're. I think that's where it's been driven, and they'll choose. There's huge research coming out of America. They'll choose a company with purpose
Mm.
because it means so much to them, and they'll work for them, and they'll work hard. So yeah, I absolutely think it's here to stay, which is wonderful. It's
I,
not going to fall by the wayside. I don't think
okay,
so.
and you're talking to a Gen B, so I'm so far away from Gen
B.
Z at this stage. And by the way, I do know. Apologies if I'm starting to disappear on my screen, but the sun is
Yeah.
coming around. The
Okay.
joys of actually live
Ireland.
recording. I hadn't anticipated the sun would be shining. So, and it's interesting because I in my own job I would talk to companies about diversity and inclusion, but I would ask them to establish what diversity is in their heads, but then to put that box away and to flip it. And I would ask them to talk about inclusion and
Yes.
diversity,
Yeah.
because I'm thinking that if you start talking inclusively, you're putting yourself in the other person's shoes and you're trying to understand what is it about them that makes them not want to be part of your world, and what it is about you, and what that you need to do to make them comfortable to be
Yes.
part of
Yeah.
your world. So
Yeah.
is that the way you're seeing the, well, that's my theory anyway.
Yeah.
And is that the way that you're seeing your engagement with the corporates? Because you're working with now, yourself
Yeah.
and Stephen Tlusky are working with some big companies. Like,
Yeah.
and good on you. I think it's great
Yeah.
to see the business take going from strength to strength. Anyway, back to
It is. It's
the question.
empowering
Yeah.
them. And what they're doing is they're walking through their own familiar premises, and they're seeing it with different eyes. They're seeing it
Mm,
with, through the accessibility lens, and they're seeing the language that's used around it, and they then become champions. They just
okay.
feel, oh, this is what accessibility. I'll give you a lovely example. It was a company in the UK we were dealing with, and they it was a brand new building, very proud of it, and they got silver. So they weren't happy when it came to
That
accessibility.
will lead me on to my next question, but go on.
Yeah, and they were kind of saying, well, one of the questions was the lift. Why has it not got voice announcements? When the door opens or what floor you're on. If your eyesight is poor, that you need this. And so the guys were saying, well, how come it's in the service lift, but it's not in our main lift, and it's a brand new
Mm,
lift? So um, they called the guys back out, and the guys, they just turned off. They'd switched it off. They didn't realize why it was important, so they switched it back
okay.
on, and then the company, put that into their, their score basically went back up, and then they were saying, well,
Mm,
what can we do more? And so that gave them it's like it's live all the time, so they're improving all the time. It gives them momentum, and
mm.
I just thought it was a great example of something so simple that they could
And
get right.
yeah, and the solutions are often simple. They're
Yeah.
not necessarily NASA level science research
Yeah.
solutions. But
Yeah.
it led me on to my next question. I suppose back to the ability words. What that principle did back then was it put them in competition with each other. But you're not doing that. Or
Mm.
what is it that Okay, what is it
They're
that motivates the companies? So
no,
they're
they actually compete against each other. It wasn't intentional, but if you have a company and they have offices in different places, um, well, two things we've noticed are happening. One, they'll compete against each other because somebody, get a higher score, and they'll be going, "Oh, what did you get? Oh, no, we've done better." And then the others want to improve as well, and they'll do more stuff to improve their score, and in that way, all boats rise. And that's great. But the other thing that happened, it was an interesting one as well. A company we were dealing with, they had a lot of offices in North America and across Europe. And one of the questions we ask at the end is, do you have disability awareness training?
mm,
And all across America, they were saying yes. And across Europe, they were saying no.
mm,
And we give them then a global report. It's an overview of how all of the offices are doing. And so they realized that this was something that the Americans had the material for training. And so they sent it over to the European offices. And so now they could all, implement this training and stuff. So from that point, they were sharing their resources. They just didn't know in the beginning what they had. So it's
okay,
great.
wow.
Yeah.
Really interesting. And just on that disability awareness training, it can be is there is it tailored per company, or is there a standard approach? Because it can be very subjective sometimes, depending
Yeah.
on who's delivering it and what the lens they're looking at it through. So what's your approach on them? Because I agree with you, that awareness piece, that education piece is massive.
Yeah. It is huge. We don't do the training.
Okay.
I know there's different companies, globally who do
Mm,
that. So this would have been American training that Um, I'm not sure what way they had that, but that's what they gave to. So we don't do training. Um, so I don't know.
okay.
I do agree. I know
Yeah.
it's not easy, and it certainly requires experts to deliver the training. But that's
Okay, that
yeah,
education piece is so important.
yeah,
And we certainly in IWA, in Irish Realtor Association, we've just launched an awareness, an inclusion and belonging piece,
yes,
education piece, Daisy project for schools. And we thought about, well, we've been out talking to companies, but sometimes, and that's where my questioning was coming from. Sometimes you'd wonder, do they really believe this? You'd wonder coming out of a talk with them. We said, what about if we uh, I get people at an age young enough when we can influence how they're thinking.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
where our Daisy project was. So we're probably tackling the same issue from
yes,
a different end. So we're looking at the children. Um,
great,
and for anybody who's interested, they can contact Irish Realtor
yeah.
Association about this. It's
Get the plug.
free. It's launched, and we're
Yeah,
at the moment. It's there for school teachers to deliver themselves, and we'll
brilliant.
support them.
Yeah,
So it's
and
fabulous.
then it becomes the norm.
Exactly. And do you think that you're probably tackling it the same thing, but with an older audience, maybe a
Yeah,
slightly more difficult audience to influence?
yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose there can be inbuilt biases, that
Hmm.
people can have, and it goes back to your question in the beginning about disability, you know,
Hmm.
and when you kind of say, do you celebrate your disability or do you celebrate your ability? It's not a word that I think you celebrate. You don't celebrate your well, I don't anyway.
Hmm.
It's a word that I don't really associate with. I would say I just use a wheelchair. I know I've had
Yeah.
an accident and I use a wheelchair, but that's my means of getting around. And I was thinking a little bit more about it, and I was chatting to people,
Hmm.
and it kind of makes you wonder about this whole word or
Mm.
disability, and you kind of say, well, where does it start and where does it end? For example, I was looking at the news, and there was a guy from the UK, and he's now going to be an astronaut,
Mm. I saw that.
and he
Yeah.
was saying, yeah, first disabled person in space, which is great. And then I was thinking, okay, so he's an amputee. He's a Paralympian, and
Mm.
he's an amputee, one of his legs. And then I was thinking, well, what if you? lost, you had to have an ankle, an amputated, or a toe,
Hmm.
or a finger. When are you disabled and when are you not disabled? Like, if
I
you
know it's
lose your
really
finger, are you
interesting. Yeah.
disabled? Or if you
Yes.
lose an
Yeah.
eye, but you can still drive and you can still go out, are you disabled? Or if you wear glasses and you're out in the restaurant and you forget your glasses and you can't read the menu, are you disabled? Like, in
Very
that
interesting.
case,
Yeah.
half the globe is disabled if you think about it that way.
Yeah,
So,
and yes, and this is where an inclusive environment, rather than
yeah,
ticking boxes, and saying, well, I need 10% of people who are gay, I need 5% of people, rather than ticking boxes and looking
yeah,
at those quotas, let's start looking at an inclusive environment, where
exactly.
it becomes less about the labels and it becomes more about I suppose, just understanding the other person's perspective, the
Yeah,
person. But
yeah.
and it's interesting because I've been doing an exercise in WWA about language for the last couple of months, and that word, that sense of disability. Some people don't identify with it, and it's a real hot potato in terms of language at the moment. Do you
Mm,
say person with a disability? Do you say disabled person? And it's an interesting discussion because a lot of people are uncomfortable not with the word disability, but because of what it comes with. The
yes.
word is the word,
Yeah.
but it's what
Okay.
it's the negative expectations, the preconceived ideas, the
Mm,
lack of expectation, the people that associate,
yeah.
and assign to us because of the word. That's
Yeah.
the problem. And
You're
I suppose
categorized.
it's categorized, you're labeled,
Yeah.
and for me it should, I would love to be at a point where it's just the word is just a word. It just describes, it doesn't do anything else.
Mm,
It'll help give context, but we move on, because when we're celebrating you and today, Noel, and everything about you, what you've achieved, the difference you're making for people with disabilities. That's what we're celebrating, and we're celebrating the fact that you're a wheelchair user, not because it's a label, but because it's a part of you.
yeah.
And that's, for me, that's important, that people say to me, I don't see your wheelchair, I only see you. And they mean it as a compliment, but I don't want them to ignore my wheelchair. But it doesn't define me. So
Yes.
don't shy away from it. It's not a negative thing. As you say, it's like a pair of glasses.
Yeah.
It's an enabler. It's a tool we use to get around. And now I've got two of them. Like you,
Yeah.
I've got to wear my glasses as well. Bloody hell! All I need now
Yeah.
is a wig, and then I don't want to offend anybody who has issues with hair. But
Yeah.
from that point of view, I understand your question. So it's around the ethos, it's around the culture rather
Mm.
the than anything else. And what I would ask you is, do you think we're ever going to get to a point where we'll have a world without the word disability?
Um, well, I
Probably a
don't
horrible
know.
question, but there you go.
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably not in the near future. I know. I know. People have tried to find different words to use.
Mm,
So, and I understand that needing a word
mm.
sometimes that does describe, you know, is
Give
necessary.
context, yeah.
Yeah, to give context, it is necessary. Um, like, but if I'm booking a restaurant, for example, in Dublin, and I want to go out, I will just say, look, do you have stairs? I'm a wheelchair user,
Mm.
so I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah, yeah.
I suppose you're right. I think it is the negative connotations that come with the word disability,
Mm.
and if there could be better ways around it, until we find that, I think we're
The-
stuck with it for a
And
while.
until actually, I would my own thought. I've been thinking about this of late,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking for that to happen, like I think we'd need to shift our world and our society to where the culture is completely inclusive, so it becomes irrelevant. At the
Yes.
moment, the our culture in a society is reflected. We don't say, well, that's an able-bodied person. We just say it's
Yeah.
a person because they're in the majority. So we still have to give the context for for us because we're in the minority, and it's to help give that context. So for the word to be gone, um, I would
Yeah.
say that our whole cultural shift would need to happen. That it
Yeah.
becomes about the person and everything. It's about that inclusive culture. I don't see that happening, say, today or
No.
tomorrow. And
Good enough.
maybe if we get to the point that the word is just a word and nothing
Yeah.
else, and that and it's not to shy away from it, because I don't want people to, but
Yeah.
it's not the defining concept of who and what we are. You're an achiever. And like I am really blown away by all that you've achieved. And you like, I know you're out of your comfort zone talking to us today because you don't like being in the limelight. Is that true?
No, I don't. Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
very
But I
much.
think it's important, well, because you're making a big difference. Yourself and Stephen are making a big difference through what you're doing for
Yeah.
for everybody. I mean everybody. So I think it's worthwhile and 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 perfectly appropriate that you're front and center to this at times. I know you like Stephen being maybe the man
Yeah.
out front because he's a good talker. That's
Yes.
and he's charming, you know.
Yeah.
But so, what inspires you, Noel?
I would say going back to maybe who inspired me first would be my dad.
Okay.
He
Tell me
had his
about
own
your dad.
business. Um, I can only describe him as a gentleman. Like he never, I never in my life heard him saying anything bad. It reminds me of anybody. You know, he never spoke badly. And if he was upset about something or somebody, he wouldn't say anything. And it just reminds me. I've always thought, um, remember that scene in Bambi and Thumper the rabbit, and his mother said, "If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all." And I always thought of that, which is nice. It's so simple. But he was like that. He never said anything bad, and he was always curious and encouraging. Um,
Mm,
and 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 so I suppose that's where I would get my inspiration. He's not alive anymore, but certainly it was him that gave us an insight in business. My sister and my brother also have their own businesses, so it's great to have ideas and bouncing ideas. What inspires me, I think, when you see something, when you can change something for the better,
mm,
obviously that inspires me. And when you see things actually moving, and people taking it, and wanting to run with it and embracing it, that inspires me. And I think this is starting to happen really,
mm.
really positively. So it is very inspiring, very.
And
And
and it,
more
and it
people who
is.
come along on this journey, the better they will
Yeah,
feel it.
and look, you're bringing them. You're bringing them.
Yeah.
You're absolutely bringing them in spades. So Noel, I take my. I suppose it's interesting. I take my inspiration myself, not from the super achievers,
Mm.
but maybe from the everyday thing. And I know, like we spoke the other day about, say, the Paralympic world,
Yeah.
where the Channel 4 had a catchphrase called "Meet the Superhumans," and I really disliked it. I just because they're not superhumans. They're A superhuman is Captain America or Iron Man, and they
Yeah.
don't actually exist. Whereas these guys are just it's the showcasing the ability of the sport. The backdrop is disability, but it's about the ability and it's about the sport. And I suppose my worry is with that superhumans, they're just ordinary people doing something very well.
Mm.
That it kind of creates an expectation for someone with a disability that unless you're climbing 3 mountains in 4 days with 3 fridges on your back, that
Yeah.
you're actually not successful.
Yeah.
And for me, that inspiration porn, as I had once called it, I heard it called in a comedy sketch, is not where I take my inspiration. It's
Mm.
from the people doing the everyday things. Whereas my friend Tony, who's blind, being an at-home dad, raising his two young daughters and facing the challenges that two young imps like that will present to you every day.
Yeah.
That's where I take my inspiration from. And is that something that you relate to?
Yeah. Absolutely. Because I think inspiration that way, or almost like a pat on the head, is it's unfair,
Mm,
because people every day are getting on with life and all the things that life throws at people, and it throws
mm,
things at everybody. I don't know anybody who's gone through life unscathed.
hmm
And so that is, you're right, it's the ordinary everyday, you know doing the stuff, but doing, I think it's so important, though, the sense of purpose in
Yes.
somebody's life is so important. I think that's
Well,
key.
you've got a sense of purpose, Noel. Like
Yeah.
you had Mobility Mojo and what it's achieving. What are your hopes for the future? Let's start with
Yeah.
Mobility Mojo first. What are your hopes for the
Well,
future of
like, yeah,
Mobility
I
Mobile?
think it goes back to what you said. It's changing the narrative. It's going, trying to change a world where inclusiveness, and universal design is just part and parcel. And that's what's expected. And I suppose that's why I like the standards, because the standards will be across all the countries and they'll be the same. So if you go, for example, traveling, if
Mm,
you're saying in a hotel, if the standards are the same, then you know what to expect. And so it is, for my, what I would hope for is that um there's just, and it's not even noticeable. It's just part and parcel. It's life. And going back to what I was saying as well about, where does, if you like the word disability, if somebody loses a finger or is,
mm,
poor eyesight, that is just for everybody.
hmm.
It's an accessible world for everybody. That's
If you,
my hope.
okay, brilliant. If you were Taoiseach for a day, what would you change?
Ah, my pet. My pet hate. There is something about, no, not my, no, not the Taoiseach. I like him,
Or
but
Leo? Our
yeah,
Micheál,
or
it's
Lego,
not
yeah,
Leo yet.
yeah. But no, what I would do is I would add spinal cord injury to the long term illness scheme, and that's my pet peeve, if you like. It's just that if you have a spinal, and I know because I've had a spinal cord injury for many, many, many years, and it's not considered a long-term illness,
Mm,
which is crazy. So I don't know what is. If that isn't, there isn't a cure for it. So I think
mhm.
I would put that. That's what I would do if I was Taoiseach for a day. I would add that to the long-term illness scheme.
Okay. And then in terms of what's the future for you? You've spoken about Mobility Mojo. Do you have ambitions for another adventure? Like
No.
you've kayaked down the Shannon for a week and you didn't drown, which I think is impressive.
Yeah.
But is there another adventure in the offing for you?
Not at the moment, because this is
Mm,
literally absorbing every minute. Um, I would like to step back and, just have more free time. And so I look forward to that. But I think there will always be something driving me. It's in you.
well,
And so
it
I
is.
don't know. Yeah.
No, it is in you. And look, I mean what I said at the very beginning of the call. It's fantastic just to look at the work you're doing, the success you're having, but also when you take it into account, you're doing this. You've raised three boys, which in its own right,
I know.
the fact that they're still alive and that they're now grown up and cooking for you. Well, one of
Yeah.
them is. I think he's still at home
No,
with
they're
you.
all good. They're all good
They're
cooks.
all
They
good.
like cooking.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there you go. That
Yeah.
in its own right
Yeah.
is an achievement. So look, I've really enjoyed being able to chat to you today, pushing you into the limelight. Much as you came in a bit kicking and screaming a bit, but it's it's fabulous. I love what you're achieving, and it's great for us just to be able to celebrate you today as part of Irish Wheelchair Association's week-long celebration of people for International Day of Persons with Disabilities. So you're our person today. So Noel, thank you very much, and
Thanks,
look, I
John.
hope to meet you in person soon
No,
again.
it's been a pleasure. Thanks a
Thank you.
million.
Okay,
Okay.
bye bye.
Bye.